You are listening to This is Oklahoma, hosted by Mike Hearn, telling stories of Oklahomans and those that have made it their home.
This podcast is presented by the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, telling Oklahoma story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com and follow them on Instagram for daily updates at oklahomahof. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma. Mike Hearn here, your host, back with another episode down in Oklahoma City today. I've been in this building so many times, but I've probably been on this floor so many times, but it looked a lot different than it does now. We're down at the branch, which is above Eote Coffee. Everyone knows what that is. But my guest today is Kelli Masters, return guest. We were just talking about this. It's been, June of 18 was the last time you were on the podcast, and it was episode 31. And today, this is probably going to be close to episode 400. We're in that range.
Look at you.
Look at you. A lot has happened since we, you had a full-time job since we last met, which, you don't do that anymore, but obviously, you've done so much. And for people listening, they can go back to that episode, and I'll link it in the description to hear about, your origin story and everything that kind of gets you to being a sports agent and growing up in Midwest City and all of that backstory, because the context from that, it's awesome to get you to where you are now. We're not going to go through that story again. We're going to talk about, obviously, the last 3 years. And I assume this building has just been a dream of yours from day one, having your own space. Walking in, just seeing the logo on the door, I was like, this is legit now, right? When you have a logo, when you're walking on the door,
then
it's legit.
You've at least arrived at some level.
Exactly.
When your name is in lights. This, back when we last spoke, I was still of counsel with Feller Snyder Law Firm. I practiced law there for 20 years, which... Yeah. That makes me feel so old to say that I did anything for 20 years. But towards the end, my sports agency had absolutely exploded, growing like crazy, but we never had our own office space. I always just ran KMM. KMM was just something that I ran out of my law firm and then on the road because I was traveling so much. And it was actually during 2020 when I think a lot of people were looking at their situations and their offices and going, what do I want to do? How do I want this to look going forward? And I just had a sense that chapter of my life was closing and that I was supposed to find a home for KMM Sports. But it's funny how this is a theme in my life. When I start pursuing something that's in my heart, it always grows and becomes something so much bigger than I originally planned. Yeah. And so I was actually at EOT having a meeting with a friend, having coffee, and happened to mention that I was looking for a new space for KMM. And I looked at possibly a co-working situation, hadn't seen anything so far that was exactly what I pictured. Right. And so my friend said, why not here? Why not this building? And I looked around and I was like, well, what else is here? Do they have office space? Do they have a co-working space? And at the time, it literally was EOT and a couple of businesses on the second floor. Everything else was completely raw and undeveloped and beautiful. It's a beautiful building. And it happens to be now basically my favorite part of downtown Oklahoma City with City and State, with Parlor, with Skydance Brewing, just everything in this area close to Automobile Alley is just such a fun, great, doesn't it have a great vibe?
It does, yeah. No, you're right.
Very alive.
I to just the area, like a friend of mine is actually looking at going in the apartment next door. Yeah. And the apartment buildings, the Metropolitan, I think it is. And Yes. He's like, what do you think about this? Or I think it was like the Lincoln Apartments by the Capitol. And it's like, you should definitely go to the Metropolitan. Like, you can walk to coffee every morning. There's breweries around. You can walk to down. You walk to Midtown, isn't it? It's a perfect location.
It's fantastic. And so I stepped out in faith and leased the entire first floor of the building. Yeah. And started the process of, I'd never done anything like this. Right. But I decided it was obviously way too much space for just the sports agency. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, what can I do with almost 8,000 square feet? And so it was just expand and literally create space for other people with big dreams and entrepreneurs and professionals and people that just wanted a different work environment where they could really be creative and inspired. And so the branch was born, and now it's it's here.
And it makes sense. I mean, as a business move as well, you're like, look, I can have people in here that love being around this, co-working space, and co-working spaces are more common now. And I mean, that helps pay the bills as well. If you have other people in the community that, it's just a smart business decision, right?
Truly.
Then coming in and saying, this place is all going to be for KMM. And it's like so much bigger.
I couldn't really justify the rent payment just for KMM, but now we've created something that's so beautiful, and we're hosting events. We'll do everything from retirement parties to mediations. We have a wedding here next month. And so I'm really excited about what we've created and the really unique community that we've created here. So I'm excited to see how it grows.
Well, I mean, perfect transition. Thank you for bringing up events, because now I can talk about the book launch that sadly I couldn't make it to, but you had your book launch here.
Yes.
Tell me about this new book.
Oh my goodness. Talk about another thing that I never thought I would do. That took years to develop. I remember several years ago just hearing out of the blue from a publicist with Tyndale House Publishing Company that said, hey, I've followed your story. Yeah. If you're ever interested in writing a book, here are the authors that I've worked with. And it was people that I really loved from a sports standpoint, a leadership standpoint, a faith standpoint, like Tony Dungy was one. And I said, I'm sold, I'd love to work with you. And so went through that whole process of writing the book proposal. And it's funny because the book was originally titled by me, Dream Job, but it was sort of tongue in cheek because everyone always says that when I say I'm a sports agent. Oh, you have a dream job. You get to go watch football for a living. I'm like, yeah, there's a little more to it. And it was we talked about it in the last podcast. It's been a challenge. It has been a brutal journey in so many ways. So beautiful and amazing and fulfilling. Right. But tough.
I mean, how many flights are you on average? Take out COVID year, but how many flights average have you been on? I mean, it seems like weekly you're on at least 2.
Over 100 easily. I go to 30, 35 football games a year, which sounds like a lot of fun, and it is. I'll be in Green Bay. I don't know when this is going to air, but I'm going to Green Bay for the game this weekend. It's supposed to be like -10.
Oh, it's like it is here right now. So
right, exactly. I'm just getting used to it. Oklahoma is preparing me for it. Yeah. So it was going to be called Dream Job, and I turned in the manuscript, and the publisher said, okay, Kelli, this is... like, can you share more good stories? Like, all of this is really hard, like painful to read. Like, we don't want to we don't want to make everyone depressed when they read about what you've been through. And I'm like, well, that's reality.
It's truth, yeah.
And it puts in perspective the victories and the successes that didn't just come without a lot of pain and a lot of growth and a lot of failure. Yeah. So we reworked the book, edited the book. I actually wrote it in 2019. We edited it all through 2020 and then released it in August of this last year. And it's been an amazing, really amazing thing. I recorded the audiobook, which was a lot of fun. Yeah. And it's great to hear. I've heard from people all over the world now that have either bought the book or listened to it and have talked about how it impacted their life. And so it's accomplishing exactly what I had hoped it accomplished. Right. It takes my prayer and my desire to make an impact on lives and reaches many thousands more people than I ever could just sitting here in Oklahoma City, much like a podcast.
Definitely. How did you find reading it? For me, that's one of my worst nightmares.
Reading out loud?
I can have a conversation and I can probably talk to a crowd.
Sure.
But reading out loud?
Oh my gosh, it was way harder than I thought it was going to be. I thought, this is easy. I'm just going to knock it out. And the third day of sitting in the room, the booth, and reading my own words and hearing my own voice and having to stumbling over a word and having to start back at the beginning of the page, not just that word. And I thought, I am never going to finish this. Yeah. And then something else that I thought was funny was I love to write. I've always loved writing. And an amazing English teacher that inspired me to write. I've just never published. Yeah. But I didn't realize that I use words sometimes when I write that I don't necessarily use in just normal conversations with people. And so saying them out loud, they didn't sound right. So I was seriously sitting there looking up, am I pronouncing this word right? Did I mean to say this word? And so it's funny how it doesn't necessarily, your normal conversation doesn't necessarily translate to what you write. And I think all of us hate the sound of our own voice.
Yes.
And so I'm sitting there listening to it going, who is going to listen to me talk for 4.5 hours?
Right, yeah.
But it was also, it's been fun to hear the feedback from people that listen to the book and say they're so glad that it's in my voice, because that's when they would read it, they would hear kind of my personality and
that's
my
the good
voice
thing.
in a way.
I'm glad when I listen to audiobooks that the person who wrote it reads it.
Yeah,
right? Like,
it makes a difference.
Such a huge difference. Even if they do go off script and they change things. I mean, McConaughey's book, when he reads that, it's fantastic. Green Lights.
So great.
I mean, I read the book a couple of times and then I listened to it, and it's the same story, obviously, but you just so much context and there's so much different. The story travels more when you hear the voice and the act.
Yeah.
It's just so much better.
And even the emotion of it.
Right.
I had several people call and say, okay, I was listening to your book and I heard you get choked up, and I started getting choked up myself. So that's impactful.
No, for sure, like 100%. And I'm glad you did that, because it's as hard as it was. I'm sure like you were glad you did it too, because it's something that's going to be out there now forever, thankfully. Because the power of the internet and all the other cool things that technology is awesome. So, would you do another one?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah, all the stories that ended up on the cutting floor from the
other
first
books.
book. Yeah, so this is going to be the rest of the story.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of stories that I felt very passionately about that just didn't fit what we wanted for the chapters in the book. It was a very structured. It's called High Impact Life, and each of the chapters is a specific lesson that I teach each of the athletes that I work with when we're working on. Okay, this is not just about getting the big contract and being an elite athlete. This is who are you becoming, and what is going to be your influence and your impact on the world, and that's applicable to every single one of us. And so that was the idea of the book. Was each chapter is one of the things that I help my players with, kind of seeing the bigger picture of not just seeing themselves as what they do.
Right.
Because when football ends, then what? Then where does their self-worth come from? When does where is their impact? What is their calling? What is their purpose beyond just being able to play a sport? And so it's things that we all need to need to learn. And so it's sharing each of those lessons in an impactful way. So there were certain, recruiting stories and crazy negotiation travel, travel stories, things like that just didn't work for this book, but they'll be in the next one.
Perfect. Can't wait for that one. Well, I mean, there's many stories that you shared when we did the podcast. So when we did the podcast, in 2018, you talked about, it was you and one other woman in the room as an agent, right? And you talked about the stories that came from that, and the guy that came up to you, which you're now friends with.
Yes.
All those, those are really cool details. And people listening, you please go back and listen to that podcast, because there's some really cool stories in that. And I'll link the description for the book as well, and the audiobook, and so they can go straight to that.
Yeah, thanks.
What about, tell me about kind of just the expansion of, of KMM sports, and we spoke, it was football and baseball, and now, you have an Olympic bobsledder, you have some, college athletes, you have a golfer, tell me about just the general, I guess, was it just a natural expansion? Yeah,
KMM has grown really organically. And it's funny that when I tried to force it to grow or bring on people, it just, it was square peg, round hole. It never worked. And so it really has been a just very natural progression. Every athlete that I represent, that KMM has on our client roster and our client family, like we like to call them, all kind of came through what I was already doing, mostly through football. For example, Asia Evans, my bobsledder, who I've now represented for 9 years. Yeah. This is her third Olympics. She, it's been longer than, I guess I've represented her for 10 years. Ish.
Three Olympics. I mean, it's
Olympics.
At least.
So 12 years, I guess. I don't know.
So awesome.
Being bad with math. Anyway, I've represented her since the Sochi Olympics, since the year before that. And she came to me through football connections. Her brother Freddie played for the Vikings for 8 years. She trained with players that I was familiar with. And so, I never had an anticipation of expanding into bobsled.
Right.
Didn't know anything about bobsled except for cool runnings.
Yes, like everybody else listening too.
And it's been an amazing, learning experience for me, learning about the sport, learning about how to build a brand around an athlete in a sport that nobody really knows anything about, and quite frankly, nobody cares about except for a couple of days every 4 years. Yeah. So it's been fun to see that expansion and that growth. The golfer, I have Amy Olson, who's on the LPGA, an amazing young woman who also came to me through football. Her husband is a coach at North Dakota State.
Okay, yeah.
And I thought it was very interesting that one of the best women golfers in the country comes from Fargo, North Dakota. I'm like, do you actually play golf in Fargo? So it's been, the vast majority of our athletes still are in football. We do have a baseball division. I've now added to my staff. KMM for a long time was this company that I talked about, and yet it was just me. And now we actually have a staff. We have one new agent. We're about to add about 3 more agents this year, all doing football, baseball, Olympic sports. Still haven't ventured into basketball yet. I think we're going to reserve that for just being something that we enjoy.
Right. You need one sport you actually go to.
So we get to just have fun and get to leave the games early if we want to.
Right.
And so the growth has just, it's been over time, but it's been done the right way, and it's been done with the right people who share the same principles and values that I do. So that's been really important to me.
Definitely. Tell me about, obviously Asia being, first of all, she was a sprinter first, right? And then went into
sprinter
bobsled.
And shot putter, which you don't see shot putters who are also
quick
and fast. It's pretty remarkable. She's so strong and so fast.
How did she get the opportunity to go into bobsled? Were you around for that, or did you come later when she was already? I
met her
bobsled?
when she had really just been introduced to the sport. And it started with one of her college coaches. She ran track at University of Illinois. She was an All-American and decided not to go pro. She would have gone pro in shot put, but she just didn't really see that as a future for her. And so she just became a personal trainer, and she worked with elite athletes, and she was phenomenal at it, but still had that fire inside of her that I'm not done competing.
Right.
And so one of her college coaches had told her about a winter sport combine, and she thought, well, I can do that. And so she went and did all of what are called the push sports or the push tests, which really just measures explosiveness and strength and speed. And she set records at the combine, and they talked her into doing bobsled. She's like, but I hate roller coasters. I hate fast cars. That was not her thing. And yet it was a perfect fit for her skill set. And so her first trip down the bobsled track, was horrible. She literally got out at the bottom and called her mom, crying from the bathroom, going, do not make me do this ever again. And her mom told her, go back up to the top of the mountain and do it again. And she very quickly became the best in the world at what she does, which she's a pusher brakeman. So brakeman is the official title, but she's the one that gets this massive sled going on the ice. And then, has to basically hunker down in the bobsled and maneuver with the pilot until they get to the end. And it is, if you ever get a chance to be by a bobsled track, it's terrifying.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
I don't know how skeleton and loose people do it. It's insanity. But so she kind of, again, was just pursuing her desire to be competitive again. And now here she is in her 30s and third Olympics and hopefully winning gold.
Is bobsled kind of a sport that it's not like you can stay in it for a long time? Does that make sense?
You can.
Okay.
Yes. Although it's honestly, there are very few people at the top. Yeah. Interestingly, there are 5 women on the bobsled team, 5 in the whole whole country. They were going to compete at the Olympics. One of them was chosen in a reality show competition, which is interesting. So I guess if there's someone listening out there that is
if you're
super
fast,
strong, super fast,
and you don't like the cold,
if you don't mind ice
and roller coasters.
Exactly.
God, I would love to sit in one just to see what it's like.
Yeah.
But again, I would probably never like to do it again because it's nuts.
You couldn't pay me to go down a bobsled track.
It's crazy, and it's been really cool to kind of follow you and then follow her through you and see that she's with through the Olympics she's done stuff with Ralph Lauren and then the big Kim Kardashian thing, which is massive, right? The new, because it was her and a bunch of other athletes. It wasn't just her, right?
Right. Well, it was. I think there were 5 total athletes. She ended up being the one that was featured by Kim Kardashian on her Instagram page, which was, and I fought. It's so funny because I fought so hard for that endorsement for her, and Ralph Lauren was not going to allow her even to do it. They said, "Well, we have sleepwear and intimates and shapewear." I'm like, "Yeah, but you're not Skims, and she's not wearing Polo Ralph Lauren sleepwear in your ads. So let's make this work." And so we made it work, and that's probably to date that's my favorite thing that we've done with Asia.
Can you go into more detail on how that all that's, because people listening, when they say what does an agent do? Well, they do a lot of things, but endorsements is one of the big ones.
It is.
Especially for a lot of athletes who, they may be in a sport that doesn't pay them as much. Golf, for example, Amy's golf career, the LPGA Tour, sadly, it's getting better.
It is.
With the announcement of them putting more money in the US Open this year and more years. But, those girls, compared to the men, do not make as much money.
No,
right?
and I think it's
endorsements is massive. In that sense,
particularly for Olympians, because quite honestly, most Olympic sports don't have the following. They don't have the money. It's been an interesting topic of just a perspective shift for even a lot of the football players that I represent. They understand that they have the contracts they do because football has tons of fans and tons of TV time. And because there are tons of fans, they get the much larger contracts. They can make millions of dollars. It doesn't mean that Olympians are less talented, didn't work as hard, aren't as focused, aren't as disciplined, all those things. In fact, the Olympians that I've been around, they're truly doing it for the love of sport.
Yes. That's
because
the definition
there's no money in it.
Yeah, for sure. To be an Olympian outside of sprinting is the definition.
Right. And unless you're, Michael Phelps.
Right. Sprinting or swimming.
Some, huge, highly decorated champion, you're certainly not going to see millions of dollars in endorsements. Right. And so that was my learning curve when I started representing a bobsledder was, well, how do you make money? And she explained, well, we get a little stipend from the foundation the Bobsled Federation. I was like, that's it?
Yeah.
How do you survive? And a lot of them work odd jobs. They teach lessons. They do training. Yeah. And so she has put herself through this to get to where she is now. And she works incredibly hard. She's incredibly talented. And so I told her years ago, again, when she had not even made an Olympic team and was brand new to the sport, I said, we're going to focus on building a brand around you, and we're going to see what we can do with it and get money in your pocket so you don't have to work 3 jobs and train full time to do what you're really passionate about. And so I started, it started with her back in the very beginning, just trying to get exposure for her. And fortunately, with my work with the NFL, I had developed enough connections with media outlets. I literally, we crashed the Winter Olympic Summit in Park City. She wasn't invited. Yeah. She wasn't one of the invited Olympians to go do interviews with the media. But I had a friend with USA Today and said, hey, if we show up, can you just do a photo shoot with us? And just pretend like we're supposed to be there. And he said, sure. And so we did. And thinking that I was just, going to try to get her in the environment and introduce her to some people. And her picture ended up on the cover of USA Today the next day. And suddenly it was okay that we were there. We ended up doing all of the press. Yeah. We started talking to, that's when we met Polo, Ralph Lauren, and started meeting some of the brands that we now work with. and BMW. She ended up getting a BMW commercial out of that. And it really was, I built her up because I believed in, I could see what she was already, I could see she was a star. Just nobody knew about her yet.
Yeah.
And so it was just making those connections and then just blowing up phones until I could get an in. And that's what happened with Skims. I mean, I didn't have Kim Kardashian's number, so I just.
I was going to say, I was hoping for that. She'd be, even though she's probably never been to Oklahoma before, she'd be a great podcast.
She has actually. Julius Jones. We'll talk about it.
Okay, we'll get to that for sure.
She came to visit Julius, but so I worked every angle I could to get in front of Skims, and finally got a hold of someone and pitched them constantly on involving her in the campaign, and here we are.
God, but it all starts with, like you said, you just saying, we're going to Park City.
We're going to do it.
What's the worst going to happen? Someone's going to tell us no when you're an Olympian. Like, they're going to let you in. Like,
exactly.
And then next it takes, you utilize your years and years of experience in the industry and friends and relationships that you've built up, and just your network and spiderweb and whatever you want to call it of people that, you can say, hey, this girl's special. And then they trust your word. And like you said, this happens. And you wake up the next morning and you're like, I would love to have been in the room when you just gave her the cover and you're just like, hey,
look at this.
Check this out. Like, that's you. And you're actually like, this is on the cover.
You are people, millions of people are seeing your picture today. And I think it also, she was an amazing case study for me and for our company and for the athletes that we take on, that building a brand doesn't necessarily happen overnight. You have those things that you push for that, happen, like the cover of USA Today, which happened pretty automatically after we pushed for it. But building a brand to the point where, we were doing, she's on billboards and she's doing commercials and she's on the Today Show and she's the face of Winter Olympics. That took years to build. And I think people get in a hurry now, and especially because they see TikTok stars and YouTube stars and going, oh, I can become a success overnight for doing nothing. And yes, some people can, but the vast majority of people and certainly athletes, it takes time to do something like that.
Well, and the thing is, because it's taken time, you can and you've built up a brand, it's sustainable too.
Yes.
Right? Like, you can, keep this going rather than literally a 15-second TikTok video, whatever it is, like, that's it. One person, it's hard for some people to build that into a brand, but you've built it into a brand. And it's awesome to see.
It is sustainable. And what I love is she now sees her purpose in life and her ability to make an impact on people as something so much bigger and with more longevity than a bobsled career. Right. Even though it's been a long bobsled career. So
which is, that's crazy. And everybody who sees bobsled always goes to Cool Run-Ins, and just the picture of them carrying the sled at the end. It's just the greatest scene ever. And they all start clapping. Good. And it's just, and he's got his egg or whatever. It's just the greatest. Oh, if you haven't seen that. I watched that movie on VHS. That's how old that movie is.
I love it.
Talk to me about, obviously, the announcement came out, was it last year, about the college athletes are now we're starting California, didn't it? California, I think, were the first ones to say, hey, you athletes are going to get paid. And even before that, there was the kicker at USC, right, who quit because he's like, I'm making money on YouTube. I'm like, so that was kind of like one of the catalysts, I guess. But now you got people like, quarterbacks or whatever that are getting multiple cars and money. And I think recently I saw, someone from OU had been offered like $1 million to go somewhere. Like, crazy amount of money being thrown around. Yeah. And, it is still the Wild West at the moment. Yeah. And, these college athletes who, for the most part, have come from humble beginnings, and if someone throws you, even a $10,000 or whatever it is, like, it's a huge amount of money, or a car, anything. If somebody offered me when I was 19, like a car to go somewhere, I would have said yes, right? Like anything, it's like $1,000 is fine. But from kind of an agent standpoint, first of all, when did you hear about this? And then what opportunities did you see coming into it as well?
Oh my gosh, I feel like we could have We could talk for hours about all the different dynamics and layers to this. So several years ago, I started hearing some rumblings just in the sports business, sports marketing in particular, about, and really you mentioned it, about the player that had to choose between playing Division I sports or making money as an influencer. Yeah. And that's about the time, several years ago, obviously, with social media evolving so rapidly and becoming what it is, and all of us that work in sports media and marketing, started realizing, influencers, companies are now paying more money to influencers.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Who have more followers on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. They're caring about more than they're caring about, being the MVP or hitting the most home runs or scoring the most touchdowns. That's important. Performing. I mean, you can't be a loser, but we realized that, oh my goodness, things are really changing, and the problem became that student athletes were not able to earn income based on their popularity, like non-student athletes that were just students. And so there became sort of this, we need to fix this. And I think it's, as with a lot of things, I think unintended consequences have come from that. The NCAA drug their feet and continue to drag their feet. Of course they do, because they want to try to protect amateurism and keep commercialism at bay. But that argument has basically gone out the window with the amount of money wrapped up in television deals and
that the schools are making on behalf of
coaches are being paid millions and millions of dollars. The schools are raking in billions across the country, and student athletes still are allowed to have scholarships and cost of living, but not being able to earn any income. And so it became a situation where, okay, where do we find the happy medium? How do we protect amateurism? How do we not acknowledge that players are really, in essence, functioning as employees, but we're not going to call them employees because we don't want them to unionize. We don't want all of we don't want to open that can of worms. So how do we allow them to be compensated? And so that, I've watched this conversation evolve over kind of behind the scenes, bubbling up under the surface over the last few years. And it finally, when it did finally happen, which was this last summer, it was like a tsunami hit. It totally opened the floodgates, and it became truly the wild, wild west. Suddenly, agencies are popping up overnight that are bringing deals to players. We were finding that a lot of players were not doing exclusive deals with anybody. They were just literally telling every agency out there, hey, if you can bring me a deal, you'll get a cut of it. And so the friends of mine that I had that were trying to negotiate deals on behalf of DoorDash and Netflix and brands were getting lists from all these agencies around the country with exactly the same people on all the lists. And they're like, who actually does represent these players? And it just became a nightmare. The other crazy thing that impacted me was in the lead up to the law change, the NFL Players Association, that's the union that governs my certification as an agent, told all of us, this will jeopardize your certification if you start negotiating for basically, players that are not eligible for the draft. And so, like the good girl that I am, that always follows the rules, I didn't touch it. I'm like, nope, not going to jump in.
Not worth it.
Others were, and I'm like, oh, they're going to get caught. They're going to get in trouble. Literally the day that the law changed, the NFLPA put out a memo by email that said, oh, we changed our mind. It's okay. Like, you have got to be kidding. And so all of the agencies that had sort of decided they were going to break the rules anyway were way ahead of the curve.
Head start.
So typical for the sports agent world. But I still wanted to proceed with caution because I thought, we're all trying to figure this out. And there are these expectations created that every athlete now is going to be able to just go and get
six-figure deal from somewhere.
A shampoo commercial and a beverage sponsorship and a car deal. And it's happening for a lot of athletes, but relatively speaking, a small number.
Right.
So where we are now, and I didn't know how I felt about this, but what we're seeing happen now is across the country, schools are realizing we've got to get a hold of this. Like, we need to figure out our players are going to get paid. We need to be part of the approval process. We need to make sure they're not breaking any rules and regulations. Yeah. How do we manage this? And so relationships are starting to be created with companies that handle things basically from a group licensing standpoint. Okay. So one group that I work with, the branding group, who I've worked with several of their team members for years, are now essentially handling group licensing. They've done it for unions for years. Yeah. Now they're doing it for schools. And so they're going in and doing agreements with schools. They're saying, we'll handle all the education of the athletes so they know what to do and what not to do, how it's going to affect their taxes, how it's going to affect their scholarships possibly, or their financial aid. Negotiating the contracts, knowing what the fair market value is, all those things. So schools are starting to realize we don't know how to do this on our own. We need to employ people who do. Yeah. So that's happening. And then on top of that, there are also, and I know the NCAA saw this coming because they talked about it all the time. The NCAA said, okay, we know this is inevitable, but we just don't want it to be used for recruiting. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what was going to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
And so what's happening now is there are groups of donors or boosters that are called collectives popping up all over the country. They're pooling their money, and they're saying, we're going to pay players to come. Yes, $3 million. There's a $3 million offer to a certain quarterback coming from a famous family to go play at a school, and others, offensive linemen at Texas, are getting offered $50,000 per person.
Coming out of high school?
Gosh, yes, I mean, just to sign with a school.
Family changing money, truly, right? And sometimes the sad thing is sometimes the kid who might have grown up an OU fan his entire life and has idolized all of the quarterbacks that have gone to OU and Heisman winners, but someone puts a $3 million check in front of him, and he's like, I guess I'm going here. Going wherever,
Exactly. And so to get kind of to realize that right now we're in the wild, wild west, but things are going to start getting regulated and everything, the pendulum's going to swing, things are going to even back out. So how do we create organizations, arrangements, contractual agreements that are going to pass the test? They're going to stand the test of time. And so now I've become involved with helping these collective groups figure out, okay, we can't just pay them to play. That's against the rules. Right. We can't just write them a check just because they're coming to play for a school. As much as boosters want to do that and say it's legal now. They've been doing it for years. But,
of course they have,
but now it's legal. Yeah. And so trying to rein them in and say, okay, there has to be structure to this. And if a player is going to get paid, he or she has to provide a service or a license, in exchange for that pay. It can't just be for the fact that he plays for the University of Texas or Oklahoma State. He has to do something.
Whatever that is, he's got to do something on
and then he has to be 1099s, and then it all has to be above board, transparent. There has to be communication with compliance, so that you're not running afoul of any NCAA, laws, state laws, federal laws. Fortunately, I'm in a place where I'm familiar with all those layers. Right. And I can come in and say, okay, I know what you're trying to do. And the way you want to do it is illegal, but there is a right way.
Right. This is how you're supposed to do it. You still get the same outcome.
Exactly.
So, but I mean, for you, it's a business, right? I mean, your business is getting into universities, building a network to take these kids who, not everyone's going to make it, right?
No.
Small percentage. Which I am thankful that some of the, some people on the teams that aren't going to make it are still going to get, for the most part, some of them are still going to get paid, which is great for them and their families. But now, as a business for you, instead of recruiting from college, you might even be recruiting from high school now, right?
Yeah, I have to be really careful with it. You have to be
careful with just how all that starts.
Because there are still laws that prohibit me as a as an agent, certified agent, from recruiting a player for the draft until he is technically eligible by law.
Right.
Which in every state is a different measure. So I have to know the laws of each state where I'm registered and bonded.
Yeah.
I can talk to high school students that are coming into college.
And build a relationship.
But we can't discuss the draft. It has to be about NIL.
Yeah.
So it's tricky. It's really tricky, but it's also going to be, it's changing the industry.
The opportunity of, your client base has just doubled, right?
Yeah.
The opportunity of your potential client base has doubled or more over because of this NIL, because of, you've got, if your kid comes into university, let's use OU, for example, a freshman comes in and you're one of your clients is a senior, but he's related or a cousin or, friends or somehow. Mm-hmm. And you might be involved in finding this guy an NIL deal, but you're building that relationship, right?
Yes, that hopefully translates, even though we can't talk about it.
Yeah, hopefully translates.
Yeah, but it also could backfire. And we saw that happen this year with agencies that said, we'll bring you NIL deals. And then they couldn't generate anything for the backup, linebacker or, and then suddenly it's like, well, we don't want to work with you going forward. Right. So you just shot your opportunity to represent them in the draft. Yeah. So, I think we're all still learning. But
I'm glad I'm on this side and not on your side. Because there's so much stuff out there. But do you have anyone that's under your kind of client supervision then that's in college?
I do. Right now I'm working with Mackenzie Donahue. She was a kind of softball star.
Had that wild catch, right? Maybe that insane catch,
the jump blue catch. Yeah. She's absolutely adorable, and we're kind of navigating everything with her right now and figuring out what can she do, what is she allowed to do, how do we build her brand, and it's been interesting. It's been a learning curve, certainly.
It must be tough because, Mackenzie, right? Like, for her, I assume it's not, there's not like a massive career in professional softball, sadly.
Right.
So, what does she do? She has to, back to Asia, she has to build a brand, right? Mm-hmm. And to go forward and kind of, use, I guess, Lauren as an example, right? Lauren Chamberlain's doing amazing stuff outside of softball, and she's built her brand through that stuff. And
absolutely.
Sadly, a lot of the girls who are in kind of friends with Lauren are either doing, their cycle bar instructors, or they work for the school, or they're ESPN analysts, or, they're at the softball, USA softball, or whatever it is. Like, there's plenty of opportunities, but, I guess with her, you're more focused on building that brand and saying, look, softball is not going to last forever. And maybe you don't want to play softball for a long time.
Right.
And even if it does, it's limited. Let's figure out something to do and go forward. So that must be
what
really
are the
exciting.
Opportunities, and identifying those and then building up to those opportunities. So I do like the NIL, the new rights that student athletes are allowed to have, specifically for athletes like Mackenzie, who are not all the non-revenue athletes, not all of them are on full scholarships. They're still having to come out of pocket for school. A lot of them will never get to play professionally, but they have fan bases and they have notoriety and they have accomplishments. And if we can use that to build a brand and seek out opportunities for them that are going to last beyond sport, then I think that's great.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. It's, I don't think I would have made any money if it had around it. Maybe, I don't know. I might have had a free golf membership somewhere.
There were no, I was a baton twirler and there was no professional twirling league that I could go join. So
sadly, people, I totally forgot that. People might, if they haven't listened to the first episode, you're former Miss Oklahoma and a baton twirler.
Yeah. Which was the first time I actually made any money. I earned scholarship money for my baton twirling talent at Miss America, which paid for law school, if anyone wants to give me grief about it.
Yeah.
It all worked out well. But I competed in baton twirling internationally for 15, 16 years.
Can you still twirl now?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Not like I could.
Well,
but yes, it's not like riding a bike, but I can still twirl.
But with an hour's practice,
I could knock some of the rust off,
Okay. There might have to be a bet, and if you lose the bet, that's what we got to bring you.
I'll twirl fire. How about that?
There we go.
It looks impressive. I don't have to do much, but just twist it around, and it looks impressive.